They came laughing, not with mouths or voices humans could hear, but through broadcast hijacked midair impulses of electromagnetic mockery that reached every screen on Earth. Towering metal-plated beings, soldiers of the Galactic ascendancy, descended from orbiting dreadnoughts, their armor gleaming like liquid obsidian. No demand was issued, no ultimatum delivered. Their appearance was announcement enough. Humanity responded the only way it knew how, with resistance. The first bullets were fired from rooftop rifles in Paris, the last by an armored division in Wyoming. All met the same fate. Pointless impacts on armor that shimmered with some invisible field. Bullets flattened, explosives fizzled. Energy weapons from the world's most advanced labs hissed harmlessly across the air. The soldiers didn't flinch. Some seemed to pause, even study the attacks, then emitted deep, pulsing flashes, laughs. Civilians watched from shelters and phones, from news feeds and rooftops, as the defenders were atomized, pulped, or ignored altogether. Cities fell not in days, but in hours. New York, Tokyo, Berlin, shut down like flick switches. Drones shaped like silver thorns floated overhead, scanning, recording, correcting. Earth's resistance crumbled not from battle, but from disbelief. Their best weapons were not ineffective. They were irrelevant. In a Colorado command bunker, a general whispered over a silent map, "They're not fighting us. They're just cleaning up." Around him, his staff stared at blinking red zones bleeding across the hologram. Nobody contradicted him. Nobody had answers. Hope shifted from strategy to speculation. Were they harvesting something? Would they leave once they had it? Could surrender be negotiated? But the invaders had no embassy, no diplomat, only soldiers and death. Humanity had always imagined first contact as a conversation. This was a verdict. Far from the burning cities and failing strongholds, hidden in the high ridges of the Rockies, Elias Kane adjusted the dial on his battered scope. He hadn't spoken aloud in 3 days. The last human voice he'd heard came from a ranger's emergency broadcast, static-laced, broken by shrieks, before the station had gone silent. His cabin, once a place of chosen solitude, now felt like the last bubble of a world gone underwater. He knelt on a snowy outcrop, camouflaged under white cloth patched with soot. His rifle, a relic of steel and discipline, rested cold in his hands. Down below, in the valley where trees had been stripped clean like matchsticks, for Galactic soldiers combed the debris, towering, inhuman, scanning with dull red optics. He watched them, not with hope, not with anger, just with habit. His breath misted softly. One soldier paused, head tilting unnaturally toward a ruined shack. There had been a family there 2 days ago. Elias hadn't gone down to check. Couldn't. Not yet. One of the soldiers raised an appendage. A blinding pulse of violet light swallowed the shack. When the afterglow faded, there was nothing left, no walls, no ground, not even ash. He exhaled through his nose, adjusted the scope, trained it on the center mass of the alien nearest him. He didn't expect anything. But still, his finger found the trigger. The shot cracked to the quiet like a curse. He held still, watched. The round struck the alien's shoulder. Then something happened he didn't expect. The creature staggered. Not a flinch, not a shrug. It stumbled back a step, a thin crack forming where plate met joint. It didn't fall, but it turned toward the ridge, scanning. Elias froze. The alien raised the device, pulsing with a quick rhythm. He slid back behind the rock, not daring to breathe. Moments later, the air shimmered with a low thrum. Scouts. Drones. He could hear them whining through the pines. He moved quickly, efficiently, packed a rifle, masked his tracks, vanished into the trees like wind over snow. The drones never saw him. He'd done this 100 times before, just never while being hunted by something that could see heat through stone. Hours later, back in his cabin, he pored over what little data he had. The crack, the stumble, that armor, impossible to pierce from the front. But there was a joint exposed briefly when they raised those weapons. He rewound the footage again and again, heartbeat ticking faster. He hadn't killed the soldier, but he'd heard it, made it bleed light, and they'd noticed. He was no longer invisible. But more importantly, they weren't invincible. He spent the next 2 days testing angles, watching patrols, learning movement patterns. His meals became cold ration bars. He slept in shifts no longer than 20 minutes. Every crackle of snow outside sent his hand to the rifle. He shot again 2 days later. This time, he aimed for the power conduit beneath the neck plating. Hit it clean. The alien dropped. No explosion, just a slow collapse, like a tower losing breath. The others searched for hours, but found nothing. He was already miles away. They didn't laugh anymore. In command bunkers across the globe, new reports stirred the air. An unknown sniper was downing Galactic soldiers, alone, without tech, without backup. Officials dismissed it. Scientists doubted it. But when satellites caught footage, grainy, distant, but clear, of an alien falling mid-stride, something shifted. They tried contacting him. Sent pings, messages, drones. No reply. Elias didn't care for medals or orders. He hadn't picked up that rifle for country or Earth. He did it because someone had to, because he could, because they'd turned laughing monsters loose on his planet. And for the first time, one of them had dropped. Silently, he sat in the cold dark of his cabin that night, listening to the wind scratch across the shutters. The fire was dying low, but he didn't move to feed it. Just sat still, eyes wide in the dim, rifle leaning against his shoulder. Somewhere out there, they were hunting him now. He could feel it, but they didn't know him, not really. He wasn't fighting for revenge, not for glory. He was a sniper, and snipers don't roar. They wait, and when the moment comes, they whisper, and something enormous dies. Elias smiled for the first time in weeks. Let them come. Snow fell in slow spirals as Elias crawled over a frozen ridgeline. The stock of his rifle nestled tight into his shoulder. His breath stayed low, quiet. The world below him was a ruinous sprawl of metal, fire, and ash, the aftermath of an obliterated town. No names remained. Signs, homes, bodies, all erased, folded into the scorched earth like a page turned too fast. Through his scope, he watched 3 galactic soldiers move through the wreckage. They glided more than walked, armored limbs fluid, their silhouettes jagged against the haze. They weren't searching. They were examining, logging, scanning, cataloging. One of them knelt near a melted car chassis, a small pulse from its gauntlet sending out a faint shimmer of blue light. Elias didn't fire. Not yet. He adjusted his position, inch by inch, until the breeze lined up with a narrow slot in his suppressor. Every variable mattered. Distance, wind, the alien's pacing rhythm. He watched the joint, barely visible when it bent forward, just beneath the collar plating. He exhaled slowly and fired. The bullet sang, a soft puff of vapor. The alien jerked sideways, armor flaring as it spun. It crumpled to the side, a shrill, metallic screech escaping from its internal systems like a dying machine choking on its own code. The others froze. Then they erupted. A wave of invisible energy burst from one, scanning the area in a horizontal sweep. Drones shot up from shoulder compartments, zipping into the air like hornets summoned by instinct. They began tracing, tracking, mapping trajectories. But Elias was gone. He had moved before the body even fell. By the time the soldiers triangulated the shot, he was deep beneath the tree canopy, winding through pine and shale with the ease of a ghost. He counted each breath, each step, each heartbeat. This was not just evasion. It was ritual. He reached a narrow crevice where the terrain funneled into a cliffside drop. He laid a small decoy transmitter in the underbrush, coated in reflective thermal foil. Let them scan that, he thought. He hiked for another hour before stopping. Once back in his hidden shelter, he downloaded the drone footage he'd intercepted. It showed the kill, clean, surgical, almost graceful. The bullet had slipped between the armor plates and shattered an internal power node. The soldier hadn't had time to react, let alone counter. He watched it again, not out of pride, but to confirm the truth. These things could bleed. They weren't gods. They had seams, flaws. They had limits. He set down the pad and opened his logbook. Notes filled every margin, diagrams of armor joints, sketches of helmet seams, equations for wind drift and velocity drop. He cross-referenced it all with the alien's death posture. Then he began reloading by hand, one cartridge at a time. He was no longer firing standard rounds. These were handcrafted. Tungsten cores, ceramic coating, and tip modifications carved with jeweler's precision. Armor-piercing. Heat-disruptive. Silent. He didn't sleep that night. Neither did the aliens. The next day, the skies above the mountains were lined with their black ships, low-hanging and thunderless. Search parties spread across the slopes. Trees were felled not with axes or fire, but simply erased, vanished by beams that left only steam. He stayed buried, his heat signature masked by a mylar cocoon stitched into the walls of an abandoned storm shelter. Occasionally, he monitored radio traffic. The global network was fractured, but some resistance cells still whispered across encrypted bands. From one message, crackling and distorted, he picked out a name, Ghost in the Snow. Another, Phantom Shooter. Confirmed. The stories were spreading. A single marksman, unseen, was downing Ascendancy soldiers. One by one. Silently. Randomly. No pattern, no broadcasts, no demands. Just sudden, inexplicable death. Elias found no satisfaction in the myth. He sharpened his tools, cleaned his barrel, and moved again. Each kill was more dangerous than the last. The aliens began adapting. Their formations grew tighter. Their drones circled wider. At one point, a scout drone detected the residue from a shot fired hours earlier. They launched a miniature hunter probe, quick, cruel, and almost beautiful in its design. It hissed past Elias within inches as he lay belly down in a stream, submerged up to his ears. It didn't see him. He let it pass, then buried it with a knife to the undercarriage when it returned to scan the area again. He examined the wreckage afterward, its shell, sensors, power source. He took what he could use, stripped it clean. Days later, part of its visual cloaking tech was stitched into his overcoat. He wasn't just hunting now. He was learning, and they knew it. They sent a new class of soldier next. Sleeker, faster, covered in tight weave armor with no exposed joints. The first one arrived in a cleared village and stood motionless for hours, as if daring Elias to try. It didn't patrol. It didn't scan. It waited. He watched from the tree lean. Didn't blink. Didn't move. At dusk, it turned and walked away. That night, an encrypted message pulsed across a resistance satellite. It came from an unknown source, tagged from an AI relay station thought to be destroyed weeks ago. Phantom, we see your work. Humanity is listening. If you're real, we need you. He read it twice, then deleted it. He wasn't doing this for Earth, not for their fear or admiration. He was doing this because he found the one language these invaders responded to, not negotiation, not weapons of mass destruction, precision, silence, terror in the form of a single bullet they couldn't see coming. He packed his rifle that evening and moved again, deeper into the northern ridges where the wind cut like knives and the trees stood older than any nation. The war was changing shape. The aliens had stopped laughing. Now they hunted shadows. And somewhere beyond sight, Elias waited for the next one to make a mistake. The first time they called him Phantom, it came over a coded burst from a resistance cell operating out a collapsed subway system beneath Toronto. No names, no pleasantries, just coordinates, elevation data, and a request. Take out an Ascendancy relay walker scheduled to pass through a high-altitude canyon within 48 hours. Elias didn't answer. He simply moved. He traveled at night, hugging ridgelines and frozen creeks, his pack stripped to essentials. The terrain was treacherous, but he knew how to blend into it, how to become a part of it. Snowstorms were allies, not obstacles. He arrived at the canyon with hours to spare and found the perfect ledge, a jagged shelf of granite cloaked in shadow, with a clean line of sight and a natural windbreak. He lay prone, watching the valley with the patience of glaciers. The walker arrived precisely on time. Four-legged, massive, its central hub bristled with antennae and signal dishes. A mobile command post, shielded and armored, untouchable by ordinary means, but not invulnerable. Elias adjusted his scope, calculating drop and drift. The weak point wasn't on the outside. It was the rotating dish beneath the central array, exposed for 3 seconds every full rotation. A direct hit They would overload its targeting systems and cascade through its sensor grid. 3 seconds. One shot. He waited, breathed, fired. The sound was swallowed by the canyon. The walker paused, stuttered mid-step. Then a pulse of electricity burst from its center, and the entire array collapsed inward like a dying star. Flames rippled across its back. The leg spasmed, collapsed, and it slammed into the canyon floor with the force of an earthquake. Elias was gone before the resistance cell arrived to salvage. The myths multiplied. Across scattered safe zones and flickering radio frequencies, they whisper about him. The lone marksman who spoke only through his rifle, who appeared without warning and vanished without trace. Resistance fighters began mimicking his methods. They built decoys from scrap metal, laid traps in force, timed their ambushes with silence instead of bravado. One unit in the Andes took down a patrol squad without firing a single shot, using only misdirection and patience. The Phantom Doctrine, they called it. Elias didn't care for doctrine. He cared for results. Back in his shelter, now deeper underground, fortified with scavenged parts from alien drones, he studied patterns. He mapped ascendancy patrols, traced supply routes, analyzed their communication rhythms. He never struck twice from the same elevation, never used the same egress path. The enemy adapted quickly, but Elias evolved faster. He modified his rifle, adding a microfluidic stabilizer stripped from an alien calibration pod. The recoil vanished. With it, the margin for error. He built thermal traps that mimic human body heat and began using them as decoys, laying out false sniper nests, creating phantom shooters across entire regions. The aliens grew desperate. They deployed hunters, bipedal assassins cloaked in distortion fields, equipped with logic-threaded tracking systems and weapons that bent space in a 10-meter arc. The hunters didn't scout. They pursued. Relentless, surgical, precise. Elias encountered the first one near an abandoned hydroelectric dam. He spotted the shimmer in the trilene an instant before it fired. The energy tore through the rock beside him, vaporizing stone in a burst of unnatural flame. He rolled, shifted elevation, vanished into the tunnels below the dam. The hunter followed, pacing with machine rhythm, never speaking. The duel lasted nearly an hour. It ended with Elias tricking the creature into stepping on a false floor rig with a high-voltage discharge coil. He fired a shot into its optic core as it convulsed. The alien didn't scream. It simply stopped. He studied its remains for hours, learned from its design, took its cloaking module and implanted it into his pack. It only worked in short bursts, but sometimes seconds were everything. From that day, the hunters began to fall one by one, each ambush more elaborate than the last. And every time Elias disappeared before they could track the source, the ascendancy was bleeding, slowly, invisibly, and in a way they didn't understand. Somewhere far above, in a ship the size of a mountain, their commanders debated how to kill a ghost. Elias watched the skies through a scope tuned to pick up heat shimmer from orbital landers. He was beginning to see a pattern, a drop rhythm, a timing sequence in how and where troops were dispatched. They weren't moving randomly. They were converging, not on cities anymore, but on high elevations, sparse populations, mountain passes. They were hunting him, not a soldier, not a general, one man, and still they hadn't found him, but others were beginning to. The resistance was evolving, growing bolder. One day, he intercepted a pulse from a young operative operating out of Northern Europe. She called herself Merrick, though the name was probably fake. She didn't beg, didn't flatter. She just offered intelligence. Schematic breakdowns of ascendancy command hierarchies, stolen from a severed uplink. The message ended with a question. "Are you willing to aim higher?" He didn't respond, not directly. But that night, he studied her data until sunrise. Among the images and reports, he found a name, not in words, but in a symbol repeated across command nodes, an alien glyph circled in red. Translated loosely, it meant overseer, a planetary commander, stationed aboard an atmospheric dreadnought that never landed. Untouchable, essential. He leaned back in the chair, fingertips resting lightly on the rifle's barrel. So far, he'd taken out patrols, drones, hunters, and relays. But if he could kill that overseer, if he could bring down the mind behind the invasion, it would change everything. He reached for his pack and began assembling his longest-range scope. The Phantom was no longer content with death in the shadows. It was time to aim for the storm's heart. The wind screamed at 13,000 feet, high above the world, where the air thinned and the mountains rose like jagged blades. Elias lay prone on a ledge barely wide enough to fit his body, his gloved hands wrapped tight around the chassis of a modified long-range rail rifle. Below him, the world stretched into a gray mosaic of clouds and snowfields. Above him, the Overseer's dreadnought hung in the sky like a black moon, silent, unmoving, distant yet tethered to Earth by invisible force lines. This was no ordinary kill. There would be no chance for a second shot, no cover to retreat into. The dreadnought's hull was hardened against conventional strikes, and its core systems were buried deep within layers of shielding and countermeasures. But Elias wasn't aiming for the ship. He was aiming for the creature inside it. The glyph he had tracked for weeks had finally aligned with Marek's intercepted telemetry. The Overseer would appear in a central observation chamber at precisely 1900 hours, Earth Standard. A ritualistic inspection, symbolic, ceremonial, never guarded from within because the Ascendancy didn't believe a threat could reach that far. Elias had calculated the distance. 2.4 kilometers. Impossible by standard ballistics. Even his best custom rounds would vaporize before reaching target. But what he carried now wasn't standard. It was a single round, forged from a salvaged alien superconductive alloy, coated with layered ceramic, lined with a micro-guidance core pirated from a downed drone. Marek had helped him calibrate it. She'd risked her entire cell, extracting materials from a weapons depot in Warsaw. The bullet weighed less than a coin, but cost 3 lives to make. He watched the dreadnought through a high-powered lens. The observation window, no larger than a dinner plate, was the only exposed surface not covered in reactive shielding. Through it, he could barely make out a silhouette, a tall figure, silver-skinned, standing as if carved from a different kind of gravity. Elias adjusted the rifle's magnetic rails, aligning them to the Earth's rotation. Everything had to be accounted for. Coriolis effect, solar radiation interference, atmospheric refraction. He'd simulated the shot 1,000 times in his mind. But the mind didn't shake. The body did. He blinked, slowly, steadying himself. The crosshairs centered. The world narrowed to one breath. He fired. There was no flash, no bang, just a pulse, a deep vibrationless hum that passed through the rifle like a ghost. The bullet vanished into the air. He kept watching. The observation window remained still for 3 seconds. 4. Then it fractured, not exploded, fractured, like a spiderweb forming in glass. The figure inside tilted backward, as if something unseen had struck its core. The chamber lights flickered. The ship's hull began to pulse with activity, a cascade of alert signals bleeding across its frame in crimson waves. Elias didn't smile. He turned and slid off the ridge in one practice motion, letting gravity do the work. Snow and shale whipped past his body as he plummeted down the slope, vanishing beneath the tree line before the dreadnought even began to deploy its retaliation protocols. Within minutes, the sky erupted. Beams of light scoured the mountaintop. Swarms of drones descended like angry hornets. Trees ignited. Rocks exploded. Entire ridges were erased in arcs of plasma and fire. But Elias was already miles away. His path laced through a maze of cold and silence and misdirection. By morning, resistance channels buzzed with disbelief. There were unconfirmed reports of chaos aboard the dreadnought, internal shutdowns, fractured command chains, erratic orbital drift. One source claimed the Overseer's death had triggered a fail-safe lockdown across all Ascendancy forces in the Northern Hemisphere. Elias remained silent. He buried the rifle under a cairn of stone in a nameless valley, marking nothing. That tool had done its work. He would build another in time. When he returned to his shelter, Marek's voice crackled over a secure channel. She didn't speak in awe or reverence. She spoke like a soldier. "You changed something," she said. "We don't know how long it'll last, but it's shaken them. They're vulnerable. He leaned against the wall, exhaustion finally dragging at his limbs. Then, don't waste a moment. We won't. A pause. You're a ghost, Elias. But even ghosts have legends. He didn't reply. The snow began falling again, quiet and endless, masking the world in white. Far above, the dreadnought's orbit was shifting. Not much, just a few degrees off axis. But in war, that was enough. The ascendancy would regroup. They would adapt. They always did. But now they would do it afraid. Now, they understood something their weapons had never taught them. Death could come from nowhere. It could wear no name. It could strike once and leave silence behind. Elias sat alone in the dark, a journal open on his lap. He added a final entry. One line. They thought they couldn't be touched. He closed the book. Outside, the wind carried no sound. But everywhere else, Earth was beginning to fight back.